"Sign them if you dare," she whispered. Mafia boss burned the divorce papers in front of her father. The silence in the apartment was different from the silence in the mansion. In the Moretti estate, the quiet felt heavy, suffocating, like the air was composed of unsaid words and centuries of blood oaths. Here, in the small, sun-drenched apartment on the edge of the city, the silence felt thin and fragile, like a sheet of glass waiting to shatter. Eva Santarelli stood by the window, looking down at the gray, rain-slicked streets. It had been 6 months. 6 months of pretending to be a wife. 6 months of walking through marble hallways that echoed with the sound of her own lonely footsteps. She turned away from the window and looked at the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. She had taken only what she could carry: her clothes, her books, and the jewelry her mother had left her. Nothing that belonged to the Morettis. Nothing that belonged to Dominic. She rubbed her arms, a phantom chill running through her despite the warmth of the heater. It was impossible to think of the last 6 months without remembering the first night. The memory was a sharp stone in her shoe, something she could not walk without feeling. It had been the wedding of the decade. 2 warring families, the Santarellis and the Morettis, binding their empires together with a contract signed in ink and sealed with a vow. Eva remembered the weight of the diamond necklace Dominic had fastened around her throat. It had felt less like a gift and more like a collar. The flashback hit her with visceral clarity. The bridal suite had been cavernous, smelling of white lilies and expensive champagne. She had stood by the vanity, trembling, waiting for him to come to her. She'd been raised to expect the worst, a man who would take what he owned, rough and unyielding. But when the door opened, Dominic Moretti simply walked in, took off his tuxedo jacket, and hung it over the back of a chair. He had looked at her then, his dark eyes unreadable, his face a mask of stoic indifference. He did not look at her like a husband. He looked at her like she was a fragile antique vase he had been entrusted to transport, something valuable, but not to be touched. "Take the bed, Eva," he had said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Where will you sleep?" she had whispered, clutching the silk of her robe. "The sofa in the study is sufficient." He had turned his back on her. He had not tried to kiss her. He had not tried to comfort her. He had simply removed himself from her orbit as if she repulsed him. Eva had climbed into the massive bed alone, surrounded by cold silk sheets that felt like ice against her skin. She had cried herself to sleep that night, the humiliation burning hotter than any anger. He did not even want her. That was the cruelest cut of all. The sound of a car horn below pulled Eva back to the present. She shook her head, dispelling the memory. That was over. She was done being the ghost in Dominic Moretti's castle. On the small dining table sat a manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, drafted by Sarah, a law school friend who had agreed to file them quietly. The ink was barely dry. Eva had signed them an hour ago, her hand shaking but her resolve firm. She was reclaiming her life. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name that made her stomach turn. "Papa?" She stared at it, debating whether to answer. Luca Santarelli did not call to chat. He called to command. She swiped the screen and held the phone to her ear. "Eva!" Her father's voice boomed, bypassing pleasantries. "What is this insanity I hear from the clerks at the courthouse?" Eva closed her eyes. Of course. He had eyes everywhere. "I filed the papers. Papa, I left Dominic." "You will unfile them," Luca said, his tone dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. "You will return to your husband's house before he realizes you are gone, and you will apologize for this tantrum. It is not a tantrum. I am miserable. It is a sham marriage, and I am done. You are a Santarelli," he roared, the sound distorting through the speaker. "We do not quit. This marriage secures the Southern Territories. If you walk away, you insult the Moretti family and you humiliate me. If you go through with this divorce, Eva, I will cut you off. No inheritance. No trust fund. You will be dead to this family. Do you understand me?" "I would rather be poor than be a prisoner," Eva said, her voice trembling but distinct. "Keep the money, Papa. I am keeping my freedom." She hung up before he could scream again. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had done it. She had defied Luca Santarelli. But the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by a creeping dread. Her father knew, which meant it was only a matter of time before Dominic knew, as if summoned by her fear. A heavy knock resonated on her front door. Eva froze. It was 3 distinct, solid raps, not a request, a notification of arrival. She walked to the door, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. If it was her father's men, she was in trouble. If it was Dominic... She unlocked the door and opened it. Dominic Moretti filled the doorframe. He was soaked. Rain darkened the shoulders of his black wool coat and plastered his dark hair to his forehead. He looked larger here than he ever had in the mansion, his broad shoulders blocking out the hallway light. His face was composed, terrifyingly calm, but there was a storm behind his eyes that matched the weather outside. "May I come in?" he asked. It was a question, but the tone suggested he would not accept a refusal. Eva stepped back, wordlessly allowing him entry. He stepped inside, bringing the scent of rain, ozone, and sandalwood with him. He did not look around the apartment, his gaze locked onto hers, intense and scrutinizing, before drifting to the table, to the manila envelope. He walked over to it, his movements fluid and predatory. Eva wanted to snatch it away, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. Dominic picked up the documents. He did not read them. He knew what they were. He held the papers in one large hand, his leather glove creaking as his grip tightened. The pristine paper crinkled, warping under the pressure. "You could have told me," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of the shouting she had expected. It was worse than shouting. It was a disappointing resignation. "Told you what, Dominic?" Eva found her voice, though it sounded thin. "That I was leaving. Would you have noticed? You haven't looked at me in 6 months." He dropped the papers back onto the table. They hit the wood with a heavy slap. He turned to her, peeling off his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. "I have looked at you every day, Eva." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, the anger finally rising to meet her fear. "You treat me like a piece of furniture, a strategic acquisition. You slept in your study every night. You barely spoke to me at dinner. You let me wither in that house. I gave you space." Dominic's voice rose, cracking the veneer of his calm. He took a step toward her. "You were terrified. I saw it in your eyes at the altar. You looked at me like I was a monster who was going to devour you. I stayed away out of respect. I gave you time to adjust, to breathe, to come to me when you were ready." "Respect?" Eva laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You call that respect? Coldness is not respected. Dominic, neglect is not respected. I thought you hated me. I thought you were disgusted by the arrangement." "Disgusted?" He repeated the word as if it were foreign. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. Eva backed up until her hips hit the edge of the small kitchen counter. There was nowhere left to go. Dominic stopped inches from her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, overpowering the damp chill of his coat. "I was never disgusted," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I was trying to protect you from this life, from me." "I didn't ask for protection," Eva whispered back, looking up at him. Her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. "I asked for a husband, or at least something human." "You want a human?" Dominic's gaze dropped to her mouth, then snapped back to her eyes. The hunger she saw there shocked her. It wasn't the cold indifference she was used to. It was a raw, starving desperation. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His grip was firm, anchoring her, his fingers digging slightly into the soft wool of her sweater. It wasn't painful, but it was possessive. It was a touch that said, "You are not going anywhere." "You think I didn't want to touch you?" he murmured, lowering his head until his forehead nearly brushed hers. "Every night, Eva, every night I lay in that study and listened to you breathing in the next room. It took every ounce of discipline I have not to walk through that door." The air between them grew thick, charged with a sudden, electric awareness. Eva's breath hitched. She could smell him, the rain, the soap, the unique scent of him that she had only ever smelled in passing. Now it surrounded her. His eyes searched hers, looking for a crack in her armor. "You accuse me of using you," he said softly. "But you never asked. You never came to the door. You just decided I was the villain." "You played the part so well," she breathed. His hand slid down her arm to her wrist, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse. "You want out? Fine. You want to sign those papers and run away to this box? Fine." He leaned in closer. His lips were so close to her ear that his breath shivered across her skin. "But first," he commanded, pulling back just enough to force her to look at him. "Look me in the eyes. Look at me, Ava. And tell me you don't feel anything. Tell me that when I stand this close, you feel nothing but indifference." Eva opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She looked into his eyes, dark, endless, and filled with a turbulence she had never seen before. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, a traitor in her own chest. She felt the heat of his hand on her wrist, the magnetic pull of his body against hers. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted to bridge the inch of space between them and find out what his mouth tasted like. But fear was a habit she had practiced for 20 years. Fear of her father, fear of rejection, fear of losing herself. She steeled herself, pulling up the mask of the Santarelli daughter. "I feel nothing," she lied. The words hung in the air, heavy and false. Dominic stared at her. He didn't blink. He searched her face, scanning every inch, and then his gaze landed on her eyes. She felt the sting before she felt the wetness. A single, treacherous tear welled up on her lower lash line and spilled over, tracking a hot path down her cheek. Dominic watched the tear fall, his expression fractured, the anger drained away, replaced by a profound, crushing sadness. He released her wrist slowly, his fingers trailing away as if letting go was physically painful. "You're a terrible liar, Ava," he whispered. He stepped back, the cold air rushing into the space between them. He looked at the divorce papers on the table one last time, then turned on his heel. "I won't stop you," he said, his back to her. "If this is what you want—" The door opened and closed. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. Ava stood alone in the kitchen, her hand clutching the spot on her wrist where he had touched her. The skin burned. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and listened to the rain falling harder against the window, washing away the footsteps of the man she had just sent away. That night, sleep came fitfully. The apartment was full of strange creaks and shadows. When Eva finally drifted off, the dream was waiting for her. She was back in the cathedral. The organ music swelled, vibrating through the stone floor. She was walking down the aisle, the heavy lace of her veil obscuring her vision. At the altar, Dominic waited. But this time, the church was empty. No father, no cousins, no business partners. Just the two of them. When she reached him, he didn't look stoic. He looked at her with that same raw hunger she had seen in her kitchen. He reached out and lifted her veil, his hands gentle, reverence in his touch. "I choose you," he said in the dream. He leaned down, and this time, there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of fire and promise, a kiss that consumed her completely. It was the kiss she had been denied, the kiss she had denied herself. Eva woke with a gasp, tangled in her sheets, her heart racing and her lips tingling with the phantom memory of his touch. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and realized with terrifying clarity that she had made a mistake. She didn't just want freedom, she wanted him, and she might have just lost both. The library of the Moretti estate was a fortress of mahogany and shadows, a room designed for silence and secrets. Dominic Moretti stood behind his massive desk, a glass of amber whiskey untouched near his hand. The divorce papers sat in the center of the blotter, the edges slightly crinkled where he had gripped them too tightly hours before. He was not reading them. He was staring through them, his mind disassembling the events of the last 24 hours like a mechanic stripping an engine. Something was wrong. Luca Santarelli was a man who treated his family like chess pieces, but he was also a traditionalist. In their world, marriage was a fortress. A divorce, especially one initiated by the woman, was a crack in the foundation, a public admission of lost control. For Luca to threaten Eva was expected. He was a tyrant. But for Luca to want this finalized quickly, that was the anomaly. Usually, the elders would drag proceedings out for years to save face. They would force counseling, mandated separation periods, and endless negotiations. But Dominic's sources in the courthouse whispered that Luca's lawyers were not fighting the motion. They were expediting it. They were clearing the board. Why? Dominic picked up his phone and dialed his sottocapo, Bruno. "I want to know who Luca has been speaking to outside the 5 families," Dominic said, his voice low and rough like gravel. "Check international lines, specifically Europe. Someone is eager to see my wife single again. And it is not just her." He hung up and looked at the empty chair across from his desk. He could still see Eva's eyes, wet with tears, staring back at him in that cramped apartment. "Tell me you don't feel anything." She had lied. He knew she had lied, but the pain in her voice had been real, and it gnawed at him. Opening old wounds he thought had scarred over months ago. Eva sat in the corner booth of the Roasted Bean, a small cafe in her old neighborhood that smelled of ground espresso and rain-damp coats. It was the only place in the city that felt like hers, a sanctuary from before she became a Moretti. Across the table, Tessa blew steam off her latte, her expression skeptical. "So, let me get this straight," Tessa said, leaning in. "You hand him the papers. He gets angry. He corners you. He asks you to tell him you feel nothing. You lie. He leaves. And now you are—" "What? Disappointed?" Eva stirred her tea aggressively, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. "I am not disappointed, Tessa. I am relieved. I did what I had to do." "You are miserable," Tessa countered bluntly. "I have known you since we were 6 years old. Eva, you do not look like a woman who just won her freedom. You look like a woman who just lost a bet." "He didn't fight for me," Eva whispered, her hand freezing on the spoon. "He just walked away. Again. Just like he always does." "Maybe he thinks that is what you want," Tessa said softly. "You pushed him away. Eva, you filed the papers. You moved out. Maybe he is respecting your choice." "Respect," Eva scoffed, the word tasting bitter. "He calls it respect. I call it indifference." The word triggered a memory, sharp and sudden, dragging Eva back to the second night of their honeymoon. The villa in Tuscany had been breathtaking, perched on a cliff overlooking a sea of black glass, but inside, the air was frigid. Dominic had spent the day on calls, managing the empire, while Eva wandered the gardens alone. That night, she had drawn a bath in the massive marble tub, hoping the heat would melt the ice in her chest. But as she sank into the water, the reality of her life crashed down on her. She was married to a stranger. She was miles from home. She was completely alone. She had started to cry. Quiet. Heaving sobs that echoed off the tile. She had her eyes closed, her head resting on her knees, in the doorway. A shadow had appeared. Dominic. He had stopped, his hand on the frame. He saw her naked back shaking with grief. He saw the vulnerability, his instinct, buried deep beneath layers of discipline, was to go to her, to wrap a towel around her and carry her to the bed, to tell her she wasn't alone. But then he saw her flinch as the floorboard creaked. She curled tighter into herself, trying to hide. "She is afraid of me," he had thought. "She is mourning the life I took from her." If he went in, he would only frighten her more. He would be the intruder. So, he had made the only choice he thought was kind. He backed away. He closed the door silently, leaving her to her privacy, believing he was giving her a gift. Inside the bathroom, Eva had heard the footsteps retreat, and she had interpreted it as the final confirmation. He does not care. He sees me crying, and he walks away, back in the cafe. Eva wiped a stray tear from her cheek. He doesn't have a heart, Tessa. If he did, he would have broken it by now. The Santarelli mansion was a monument to old-world power. filled with velvet drapes and statues that seemed to watch you with judgmental eyes. Dominic walked through the front doors without waiting to be announced. The guards hesitated, then stepped aside. You did not block a man who looked like he was ready to burn the building down. Luca Santarelli was in the sunroom, trimming a bonsai tree with cruel, precise snips. He didn't look up when Dominic entered. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Dominic," Luca asked, his voice oily and smooth. "Have you come to return my daughter's jewelry, or perhaps to sign the papers?" "I came to ask why you were in such a rush," Dominic said, stopping on the other side of the table. "You threatened to disown her yesterday. Today, your lawyers are waiving the cooling-off period. You are greasing the wheels. Luca, why?" Luca set the shears down. He looked up, his eyes hard and flat like shark skin. "Eva is unhappy. As a father, I simply want what is best for her. This marriage, it was a mistake. She's a romantic soul. Dominic, she has these illusions about love. You and I, we are practical men. We know when a merger has failed." "It hasn't failed," Dominic said, his voice dropping. "Unless you have found a better merger." Luca's smile was thin, barely a ripple on his face. "Don't be paranoid. It doesn't suit you." "I'm not paranoid. I'm informed." Dominic leaned his knuckles on the table, towering over the older man. "If I find out you are playing games with my wife..." "Luca, the alliance won't just end, it will detonate." Luca chuckled, picking up a cloth to wipe his hands. "Your wife has already left you. Boy, she's not your property anymore. She belongs to the family, and the family decides her future." Dominic walked out of the mansion, the rage simmering in his gut. As he climbed into his SUV, his phone buzzed. It was Bruno. "Boss, we got it," Bruno said. "You were right. There's been chatter on the encrypted channels. The Valois syndicate in Marseille. Their eldest son, Henri, he's been in the city for 2 days. Let me guess," Dominic said, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned white. "He's meeting with Luca." "Better. He's already transferred a dowry payment to an offshore account linked to Santarelli Holdings. The deal is done. Dominic, the minute that divorce is signed, Eva is on a plane to France." Dominic didn't say goodbye. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat and slammed his foot on the gas. The rain had returned, lashing against the windows of Eva's apartment. She was curled up on the couch, a book unread in her lap, when the pounding on the door started again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was urgent, angry. She opened the door and Dominic stormed past her, pacing into the center of the small living room like a caged tiger. He looked worse than he had yesterday. His eyes were rimmed with red, his jaw clenched tight enough to snap steel. "Dominic?" Eva closed the door, her heart hammering. "What are you doing here? If you came to yell at me again..." "He sold you." Dominic turned to her, the words exploding out of him. Eva froze. "What?" "Your father. He isn't angry about the divorce. Eva, he's banking on it. He has already arranged a new marriage. Henri Valois, the French syndicate." Eva stared at him, blinking rapidly. The absurdity of the statement made her want to laugh. That is ridiculous. Papa threatened to disown me. He wants me to come back to you." "That was theater," Dominic shouted, gesturing wildly. "He needed you to feel isolated so you would sign the papers quickly. He knows if you knew the truth, that you are being traded like cattle to the French, you would never sign. You would fight. So he played the angry father. But the deal is already done. The dowry has been paid." "You are lying," Eva said, shaking her head. She backed away from him. "You are making this up. You are just trying to scare me into coming back because your pride can't handle being left." Dominic stopped pacing. He looked at her with a mixture of fury and pity that chilled her to the bone. "You think I would use this? You think I would invent a nightmare just to keep you? I don't know who you are anymore, Dominic. You ignored me for 6 months and now you show up with conspiracy theories? I ignored you because I didn't want to trap you," Dominic roared, the sound vibrating in the small room. "But I won't let him sell you to Valois. Henri is a monster, Eva. He has buried 2 wives. If you get on that plane, you won't come back." "Stop it!" Eva screamed, covering her ears. "Just get out! Get out!" Dominic stared at her, his chest heaving. He saw the absolute refusal in her eyes. She didn't trust him. Why would she? He had given her silence when she needed words. "Fine," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Don't believe me. Check his correspondence. You used to manage his private email server before we were married. I know you still have the access codes. Look for the folder marked Marseille." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. He didn't look back. "When you see the truth," he said softly, "don't wait. Run." For 10 minutes, Eva stood in the center of the room, listening to the silence. He's lying. He has to be lying. But the doubt was a worm, burrowing deep. Dominic had been cold. Yes, he had been distant. But he had never been a liar. Her hands trembling. Eva went to her laptop. She sat at the small kitchen table and opened the browser. She typed in the address for the Santarelli private server. Her father thought she was just a dutiful daughter who arranged flower deliveries, but she had set up his entire digital encryption 3 years ago. He had never changed the admin password because he was too arrogant to believe anyone would dare hack him. She typed it in. Family first, access granted. She navigated to the inbox. Nothing. She checked the trash. Nothing. Then, she went to the archived folders. There it was. Project Marseille. Eva clicked the folder. Her breath hitched in her throat. There were emails dating back 3 months, before she had even filed for divorce. Her father had been negotiating with the Valois family while she was still living in Dominic's house. He had anticipated the failure of the marriage, or perhaps he had planned to sabotage it all along. She opened the most recent attachment. It was a contract, a marriage contract between Eva Santarelli and Henri Valois. The date was set for next week, and then she saw the text message log sync to the cloud. Luca de Henri. She has filed. The papers will be signed by Friday. Have the jet ready. She will be heavily sedated if necessary. Eva slammed the laptop shut, gasping for air. The room spun. Dominic was right, every word. Her father wasn't trying to save her marriage. He was liquidating an asset. She wasn't a daughter to him. She was currency. Fear, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She couldn't stay here. Her father knew where she lived. If he decided to accelerate the timeline, she grabbed her coat. She didn't pack a bag. She just ran. The gates of the Moretti estate opened the moment the camera recognized her car. Eva drove up the winding driveway, the gravel crunching under her tires like bones. She parked haphazardly in front of the massive oak doors and scrambled out into the rain. Dominic opened the door before she could knock. He had changed into a black t-shirt and sweatpants, looking like a man who had been preparing for a fight. When he saw her, wet hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with terror, his shoulders dropped an inch. "You checked," he said. Eva walked past him into the foyer, the heat of the house hitting her frozen skin. She turned to face him, the adrenaline turning into a volatile mix of anger and relief. "You knew," she accused, her voice shaking. "You knew he was doing this." "I suspected," Dominic said, closing the heavy door, shutting out the storm. "I confirmed it today. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you wait until I was already drowning? I told you the moment I knew." Dominic stepped toward her. "I came straight to you." "You waited 6 months to talk to me at all," Eva shouted, pushing against his chest. It was a futile gesture. He was a wall of muscle, unmoving. "You let me rot in this house thinking I was unlovable, thinking I was nothing to you, while my father sold me off like a used car. I never thought you were nothing." Dominic caught her wrists, stopping her assault. His hands were warm, his grip desperate. "You were everything. That's why I couldn't touch you. I knew if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. And I didn't want to force you into a life you hated." "I didn't hate life," Eva cried, looking up at him, the tears finally spilling over. "I hated loneliness. I hated you." The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Dominic pulled her closer, the space between them vanishing. The air in the foyer crackled, the tension of 6 months of silence finally snapping. "Do you hate me now?" he growled, his voice rough with emotion. Eva looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing her. She saw the man beneath the title, the husband she had wanted but never known. "I don't know," she whispered. Dominic didn't wait. He crashed his mouth down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was an argument phrased in the language of lips and teeth. Dominic kissed her like he was breathing for the first time in months, devouring her sighs. His hands tangled in her wet hair, angling her head back to deepen the contact. Eva gasped, her body responding instinctively. She melted against him, her hands clutching the fabric of his shirt. The fire that had been smoldering between them ignited into a blaze that threatened to consume them both. For a moment, there was no father, no France, no war. There was only Dominic, his taste, his heat, his overwhelming presence. She felt his hands slide down her back, pulling her hips flush against his. The hardness of his body, the sheer power he held back, sent a jolt of electricity through her. But then the fear returned, the memory of the contract, the feeling of being a pawn. She gasped and pulled away, stumbling back. Her chest heaved, her lips swollen and red. Dominic stood still, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His eyes were black pools of desire. But he didn't chase her. He stayed where he was, his hands open at his sides. "I can't," Eva whispered, touching her mouth. "I can't do this just because I'm scared. That's not real." Dominic took a deep breath, slowly regaining control. He nodded, though the hunger in his eyes didn't fade. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're right. Not like this." He gestured toward the grand staircase. "Go upstairs. Take the guest room. Take the master suite. Take whatever room you want. There are guards at every perimeter wall." He looked at her, his expression settling into a fierce, protective vow. "Sleep, Eva. Your father can't reach you here. Not tonight, not ever again." Eva looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt safe. She nodded silently and turned toward the stairs, leaving Dominic standing guard in the shadows of his own home. Eva woke to the smell of sandalwood and the distant, rhythmic sound of violence. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The mattress was softer than the one in her apartment. The sheets had a higher thread count and the air cooler. She rolled over, her cheek pressing against the fabric of the pillow, and realized she was wearing a shirt that did not belong to her. It was a black dress shirt, oversized and soft from wear, enveloping her frame like a second skin. It smelled of him, Dominic. A scent of expensive cologne, rain, and something darker, like burnt wood. The sound came again. Thud, thud, crack. She sat up, pushing the heavy duvet aside. The events of the previous night came rushing back. The rain, the revelation about her father, the way Dominic had kissed her in the foyer, the way she had pulled away. She was in the master's suite. He had given it to her, choosing to sleep elsewhere. The door was locked, a precaution he had insisted on, though she suspected the lock was more for her peace of mind than any real threat breaching the estate's perimeter. Eva slid out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She followed the sound to the French doors that opened onto the sprawling stone balcony overlooking the rear courtyard. She unlatched the lock and stepped out. The morning air was crisp, scrubbing the sky clean after the storm. Below, in the center of the courtyard, Dominic was training. He was shirtless, wearing only loose athletic shorts. His back was to her, a landscape of corded muscle and scars that told stories she had never asked to hear. A heavy punching bag hung from a steel frame, and he was dismantling it with terrifying precision. Thud. A left hook. Thud. A right cross. Crack. A roundhouse kick that made the heavy chain rattle in protest. Eva wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly in the morning breeze, but she could not look away. He was magnificent and terrifying. She had seen him in suits, armored in Italian wool and silk, but this was different. This was the raw material. This was the man the Moretti family sent to end wars. He was bruised. A large, purpling mark bloomed on his ribs, a souvenir, she assumed, from a skirmish she knew nothing about. He moved with a fluid, lethal grace, sweat glistening on his skin, his breathing controlled and rhythmic despite the exertion, as if he felt her eyes on him. Dominic stopped mid-strike. He caught the swinging bag with one gloved hand, silencing its momentum. Slowly, he looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. Eva stood frozen on the balcony, the oversized shirt slipping slightly off one shoulder, her hair a tangled halo around her face. Dominic stood in the courtyard, chest heaving, his knuckles taped, his gaze dark and piercing. There was no wave, no smile. Just a charged, heavy acknowledgement. The air between them seemed to thin, the oxygen replaced by a sudden, spiking heat that had nothing to do with the sun rising over the horizon. He looked at her not as a guest, or a wife to be protected, but as a woman he was starving for. He held her gaze for a long beat, then nodded once, stripped off his gloves, and walked toward the house. 30 minutes later, Eva sat at the long marble island in the kitchen. The house staff was conspicuously absent. Dominic had likely dismissed them to give her privacy. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, the steam curling into the silence. Dominic entered through the back door, a towel draped over his shoulders. He had showered, his hair damp and combed back, and he wore fresh track pants and a clean white t-shirt that clung to his damp skin. He poured 2 mugs of coffee black and slid one across the marble to her. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "A little," Eva said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "I heard you outside. I needed to clear my head." Dominic leaned against the counter opposite her, crossing his arms. The bruises on his knuckles were faint but visible. "You are hurt," she said, nodding toward his ribs. He glanced down, dismissive. "It is nothing. A disagreement with a business partner who did not want to listen. Is that how you solve everything, with your fists?" "Only when words fail," he said softly. He looked at her, his expression softening. "With you, words failed for 6 months, but I never raised a hand." Eva looked down into her coffee. The liquid was dark, like a mirror. "Why didn't you?" she whispered. "Why didn't you touch me, Dominic? Not even once, not even to hold my hand at dinner." Dominic sighed, a sound that seemed to be pulled from the depths of his chest. He walked around the island, pulling out the stool next to her, but he didn't sit. He stood close, his presence overwhelming. "Because you were trembling," he said. Eva looked up. "What?" "At the wedding," Dominic explained, his eyes searching hers. "When I put the ring on your finger, your hand was shaking so hard I thought you might faint, and later, in the suite. You looked at me like I was the executioner. I knew what you had heard about me, the ruthless Moretti heir, the cold bastard. I was scared," Eva admitted. "My father told me you were a savage. He told me my only job was to survive you." Dominic's jaw tightened, and I knew that. I knew if I touched you, if I tried to be a husband in the way I wanted to be, you would only see it as me taking what I bought. I couldn't do that to you. Eva, I wanted you to feel safe more than I wanted to feel you against me, even if it killed me. Eva felt a lump form in her throat. "It killed you?" "Every night," he confessed, his voice dropping to a murmur. "Knowing you were down the hall, hearing you cry yourself to sleep, and knowing I was the cause, but also knowing that my comfort would only terrify you more. It was torture." "I thought you didn't want me," Eva said, the truth finally spilling out. "I thought you looked at me and saw a business contract, an obligation. I thought I wasn't enough to make you want to break your rules." Dominic stared at her, stunned. "Not enough." He moved then, a sudden, fluid motion that made Eva gasp. He didn't reach for her. He sank down. Dominic Moretti, the man who bowed to no one, dropped to his knees on the kitchen floor beside her stool. He was lower than her now, forcing her to look down at him. It was a position of vulnerability, of submission, completely at odds with his power. He placed his hands on the knees of her jeans, lightly, asking for permission. "Eva," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never wanted to own you. I have owned things my whole life, properties, businesses, people. I did not want a wife I owned. I wanted a wife who chose me. He squeezed her knees gently. I didn't touch you because I was waiting for you to look at me without fear. I was waiting for you to realize that I am not your father. I don't trade with people. I will protect them. Eva looked at the man kneeling before her. The arrogance was gone. The coldness was gone. All that was left was a man stripping himself bare, offering her the truth she had been too blind to see. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the damp hair at his temple. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, a shudder running through his powerful frame. "I am not afraid of you," she whispered. "Not anymore." Dominic opened his eyes. They were dark, burning with a quiet intensity. He turned his face, pressing a kiss to the palm of her hand. "Good," he murmured against her skin, "because I am done waiting." The day passed in a blur of strategy and silence. Dominic spent hours in his study, on encrypted calls, fortifying the estate, preparing for the fallout from the Sanarelli family. Eva stayed close, reading in the library, but her mind was not on the words. It was in the memory of him kneeling, on the heat of his mouth against her palm. Night fell, heavy and moonless. The house settled into a deep quiet, but sleep refused to come to Eva. She lay in the massive bed, the sheets tangling around her legs, her body humming with a restless energy. She couldn't stay here, not tonight. She slipped out of bed, pulling the silk robe tighter around herself. She didn't turn on the lights in the hallway. She knew the path. The door to Dominic's study was ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling onto the parquet floor. She pushed it open quietly. Dominic was sitting in his leather chair, facing the window, looking out into the darkness. A tumbler of whiskey sat on the desk, untouched. He was still dressed in his shirt and trousers, though the top buttons were undone, revealing the hollow of his throat. He didn't turn around. "Go back to bed, Eva," he said, his voice low and strained. "I can't sleep," she said, stepping into the room. "Try harder." "Why are you pushing me away?" "Because I am hanging by a thread," Dominic said, turning the chair slowly to face her. His eyes were tired, but the fire behind them had not gone out. If anything, it was burning hotter. "You are in my house. You are wearing my clothes, and you are looking at me like you want something I promised myself I wouldn't take until this war was over." Eva walked toward the desk. The heavy oak furniture was a barrier between them, but it felt flimsy. "The war isn't over," she said softly. "It might never be over. Are we going to wait forever?" "I am trying to be honorable," Dominic gritted out, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I don't want honor tonight," Eva said. She rounded the corner of the desk. Dominic went rigid. "Eva, don't come closer." She stopped, 2 feet away from him. "Why?" "Because if you come closer," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, rough timbre, "I won't be able to stop. So unless you mean it, unless you are absolutely sure, turn around and walk out that door." Eva looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on the chair. She saw a man holding back a tidal wave with nothing but willpower. She didn't turn around. She took the final step, closing the distance, and reached out to touch his shoulder. The contact was like striking a match. Dominic moved instantly. He spun the chair, reached out, and pulled her between his spread knees. His hands clamped onto her waist, pulling her flush against him. He looked up at her, his eyes searching hers for one last second of hesitation. He found none. "Dominic," she breathed. He didn't let her finish. He surged up, burying his hands in her hair, and captured her mouth. This was not the kiss from the foyer. That had been a question. This was the answer. It was deep, wet, and starving. Eva gasped, opening to him, and he groaned low in his throat, the sound vibrating against her lips. His tongue swept into her mouth, tasting her, claiming her. Eva's hands clutched at his shoulders, pulling him closer. She felt the roughness of his jaw, the heat radiating from his skin. The scent of him, whiskey and sandalwood, filled her senses, intoxicating her. Dominic's hands roamed over her back, down to her hips, gripping her tightly. He broke the kiss to trail hot, biting kisses down the line of her jaw, to the sensitive pulse point of her throat. "You have no idea," he whispered against her skin, his voice ragged. "How long I have wanted to do this." "Show me," Eva challenged, breathless. Dominic growled. He stood up, lifting her effortlessly. Eva wrapped her legs around his waist, and he turned, setting her down on the edge of the heavy oak desk. He swept the papers and the untouched whiskey aside with one arm, the glass thudding onto the carpet. Ignored. He stepped between her legs, pressing his hips against hers. His hands were everywhere on her thighs, her waist, tangling in her hair. He kissed her again, harder this time. A desperate devouring that made her head spin. Eva's hands fumbled with the buttons of his shirt. She needed to feel his skin. She pushed the fabric aside, running her palms over the hard planes of his chest, over the scar on his shoulder, over the frantic beating of his heart. He hissed in a breath at her touch, his head falling back. "Eva!" She pulled him down to her, her lips finding him again. The kiss turned frantic, a clash of longing and relief. She felt him hardening against her, the evidence of his desire undeniable. His hand slid up her thigh, pushing the silk of her robe aside, his thumb grazing the sensitive skin. Eva arched into his touch, a gasp tearing from her throat. "Dominic, please." The plea hung in the air, heavy and raw. Dominic froze. His hand stopped moving. His lips hovered inches from hers. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving against hers, his eyes blown wide and black with lust. But something in her voice, some note of desperation, of fear, had pierced the haze. He closed his eyes, fighting a visible battle for control. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "No," he whispered. Eva blinked, dazed. "What? Not like this," Dominic said. He pulled his hand away from her leg, though he didn't step back. He kept his forehead against hers, grounding them both. "Not here. Not tonight." "Why?" Eva asked, her voice trembling. "I want you." "I know you do," Dominic said, pulling back slightly to look at her. His face was flushed, his hair messy, his mouth swollen from her kisses. He looked wrecked. "And I want you more than I want my next breath, but not because you are scared." "I'm not scared of you," she insisted. "No," he agreed, "but you are scared of what is out there. You are scared of losing your freedom. You are scared of your father." He smoothed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch agonizingly gentle. "You are running on adrenaline and fear. Eva, if I take you now, on this desk, while you are hiding from the world, I am just another man taking advantage of your vulnerability. I won't be that man." He took a deep breath and stepped back, creating a sliver of space between them. He buttoned his shirt with shaking hands, hiding the chest she had just been clinging to. "When we do this," he said, his voice steadying, "it will be because the war is over. It will be because you are free and you are choosing me with a clear head, not as a refuge, but as a partner." Eva sat on the desk, her robe disheveled, her heart pounding. She looked at him, this dangerous, violent man who had just stopped the one thing he wanted most because he respected her too much to take it the wrong way. The realization hit her harder than the passion had. He truly loved her. He loved her enough to deny himself. She slid off the desk, her feet touching the floor. She walked over to him and rested her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it hammering, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on tight. "Then don't let them take it from me," she whispered into his shirt. "Don't let them take my freedom, because I want to choose you." Dominic's arms came around her, crushing her to him, burying his face in her hair. "I will burn the world down first," he vowed into the silence of the room. "I promise you, Eva, I will burn it all down." The plan was not elegant. It was a sledgehammer. In the hushed confines of his study, Dominic laid it out with the cold precision of a general discussing a bombardment. If Eva testified, if she went on record stating that her father had used coercion, financial threats, and psychological abuse to force her into the marriage with Dominic, and was now attempting to traffic her into a second marriage with Henri Valois, The legal standing of any contract Lucas signed would be nullified. It is called duress, Dominic explained, leaning over the map of the city spread across his desk. In our world, contracts are blood. In the legal world, they are paper. If you prove the paper is poisoned, the deal with Valois collapses. Henri is a predator, but he is a businessman. He will not pay millions for a wife who comes with a federal investigation attached to her name. Ava stood by the window, her arms crossed tight against her chest. If I do this, I'm not just divorcing my father. I am declaring war on him. He will see me as a traitor. He already sees you as a commodity, Dominic said, his voice low. This is how you become a player. For the next 6 hours, the library became a war room. Eva had to relive 20 years of fear. She opened her laptop and dug into the digital archives she had secretly maintained. It started with emails, veiled threats about her mother's estate if she did not attend certain galas, then audio recordings. Eva had started recording her father's calls 2 years ago, an instinct born of survival. She played one for Dominic. Luca's voice filled the room, distorted but unmistakable. You will marry the Moretti boy, or I will strip you of your name. You will be on the street. Eva, do you hear me? I will break you. Dominic listened, his face a mask of stone, but his hand gripped the edge of the desk until the wood groaned. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. That is enough, Dominic said quietly. We have enough. But the cost of their offensive was already mounting. A knock on the door interrupted them. It was Bruno, Dominic's consigliere and oldest friend. He looked pale. We have a problem, Dom, Bruno said, stepping inside and closing the door firmly. The elders are hearing whispers. They know Eva is here. They know the divorce is stalled. If you side with her against Luca openly, if you help her file charges, the Moretti family will fracture. Let it fracture, Dominic said, not looking up from the files. Be reasonable, Bruno hissed, stepping closer. Half the capos support the Santarelli alliance. If you blow this up, they will see you as weak. They will say you are thinking with your heart, not your head. They will move to replace you. Dominic straightened, towering over his second in command. Let them try. If the price of this chair is selling my wife to a butcher in Marseille, then the price is too high. Prepare the car. Bruno, we are leaving the city. The retreat was a cabin of timber and stone, perched high in the mountains where the air was thin and smelled of pine and snow. It was a safe house Dominic had bought years ago, off the books, a place that did not exist on any family ledger. They arrived as the sun was dipping below the peaks, painting the snow in shades of violet and bruised orange. The silence here was absolute. No sirens, no shouting. Just the wind through the trees, inside. Dominic built a fire in the massive stone hearth while Eva unpacked the small bag of groceries they had stopped for. The domesticity of it felt strange, fragile, like a dream that could vanish if they spoke too loudly. They ate dinner on the rug in front of the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The tension of the city began to bleed away, replaced by something heavier, deeper. Eva watched Dominic stare into the fire. He looked weary, the weight of his empire, the threats from her father, the mutiny brewing in his own ranks. He carried it all in the set of his shoulders. You are risking everything for me, she said. It wasn't a question. Dominic turned to look at her. The firelight softened the sharp angles of his face. I am risking nothing that matters. You could lose your title, your legacy. My legacy is a history of violence, Dominic said softly. I never asked for the crown, Eva. I took it because I was the strongest, because I thought I could keep the peace. But there is no peace in a house built on fear. He reached out, his fingers grazing the back of her hand. His touch was electric, sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. I would walk away, he admitted, the confession hanging in the air. If I could ensure your safety, I would hand the keys to Bruno and never look back. Eva turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. Then why don't we? Because they will hunt us, he said, until we finish this. He looked at her then, really looked at her, with a hunger that had been restrained for too long. The conversation about strategy and survival faded, swallowed by the immediate, overwhelming reality of their proximity. Eva moved first. She shifted on the rug, closing the distance between them. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the roughness of his stubble. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Dominic made a low sound in his throat. A surrender. He leaned into her touch, turning his face to kiss her palm. Then, slowly, inevitably, he moved over her. This time, there was no desk, no frantic tearing of clothes, no desperation driven by fear. This was a conversation without words. Dominic lowered her onto the thick fur rug, his body covering hers, shielding her from the cold, from the world. He kissed her as if she were made of glass, precious, fragile, and infinitely valuable. His lips moved over hers with a slow, deliberate tenderness that made her breath hitch. He tasted whiskey and smoke. Eva's hand shook as she reached for the hem of his shirt. She pulled it up, her fingers skimming over the hard muscles of his stomach, the scars on his ribs. Dominic pulled away just enough to discard the shirt, then returned to her. Skin against skin, heat against heat. "Eva," he breathed against her neck, his voice wrecked. "Tell me to stop. You have to tell me." "Don't stop," she whispered, arching into him. "Please, Dominic, don't stop." He didn't. He made love to her with a slow, agonizing reverence. Every touch was a question, every kiss a promise. He worshipped her body with his hands and his mouth, erasing the memories of cold nights and lonely rooms. There were no power games here, no mafia boss and arranged bride. There was only a man and a woman, stripped of their armor, finding salvation in each other. When the tears came, tears of relief, of release, of overwhelming emotion, Dominic did not look away. He kissed them from her cheeks, tasting her salt, murmuring soft Italian endearments against her skin. He held her gaze as they moved together, binding them in a way no contract ever could. For the first time in her life, Eva felt completely seen, and for the first time in his life, Dominic felt completely known. Later, they lay tangled together under a heavy wool blanket, the fire dying down to glowing embers. Eva rested her head on Dominic's chest, listening to the slow, steady thrum of his heart. His arm was draped over her, holding her close, as if he feared she might float away. "I always wanted to open a garage," Dominic said, his voice rumbling through his chest. Eva smiled against his skin. "A garage? The Don of the Moretti crime family wants to fix carburetors." "I like fixing things," he murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "Engines make sense. You put the parts in the right place, add fuel, and they work. People are complicated." "We could go to the coast," Eva whispered, allowing herself to dream. "Somewhere where no one knows the name Santarelli or Moretti. I could write. You could fix cars." "Maybe," Dominic said. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. One day. But the morning brought the world crashing back in. Sunlight was just beginning to bleed through the curtains when Dominic's secure phone buzzed on the floor where he had discarded it. Then it buzzed again and again. Dominic reached down, groaning, and checked the screen. His face hardened instantly. The softness of the night before evaporated, replaced by the mask of the boss. "What is it?" Eva asked, sitting up, clutching the blanket to her chest. "The news leaked," Dominic said, standing up and pulling on his pants. "Your lawyer friend filed the motion at dawn. By 8 in the morning, a reporter at the Chronicle had the story. Mafia heiress accuses father of coercion. It is everywhere." "Eva," the phone rang in his hand. The caller ID displayed a single word, Luca. Dominic answered it on speaker. "You dead man walking!" Luca's voice screamed from the device, so loud it echoed in the quiet cabin. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can steal my daughter and use her to slander me in the press?" "She told the truth, Luca," Dominic said calmly, buttoning his shirt. "Something you are allergic to." "Bring her to me," Luca roared. "Bring her to the old vineyard, noon. If you are not there, I will burn every asset you have. I will send a hit squad to every corner of the city. I will start a war that will leave nothing but ashes. I will be there. Dominic said. Alone. Dominic, no! Eva cried as he hung up. Dominic turned to her. He was fully dressed now, the armor back in place. He walked over to the bed and cupped her face in his hands. I have to go, he said. If I don't face him, he will tear the city apart looking for us. He will kill you, Eva said, her voice trembling. He is cornered. He is dangerous. He won't kill me, Dominic said grimly. He needs me to sign the divorce papers. He needs me to validate the lie so he can sell you to France. As long as I am alive and married to you, his deal with Valois is dead. Let me go with you. No. His voice was absolute. You stay here. Bruno has men on the perimeter. You are safe here. He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of goodbye, and then he was gone. The vineyard was a skeleton of its former self. It had once been the pride of the combined families, a symbol of their first truce 30 years ago. Now, the vines were withered and brown, twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. Dominic parked his SUV at the end of the dirt road and walked the rest of the way. He saw Luca standing near the old crushing shed. He was not alone. 4 of his personal guards stood in a semicircle, their hands hovering near their jackets. Luca looked manic. His tie was crooked, his face flushed with rage. He held a folder in his hand. You have some nerve, Luca spat as Dominic stopped 10 feet away, hiding her away like a stolen trinket. She is my wife, Dominic said, his voice steady. And she is not hiding. She is recovering. Recovering from what? Her own stupidity? Luca threw the folder onto the dusty ground between them. Sign them. Sign the divorce papers, issue a statement saying the coercion charges are the ramblings of a hysterical woman. Do it, and I might let you live. Dominic looked at the papers in the dirt. He didn't move. No. The silence stretched, tight as a bowstring. What did you say? Luca whispered. I said no. I'm not divorcing her, and she is not marrying Valois. Luca snapped his fingers. 2 of the guards moved. Dominic saw it coming, but he didn't draw his weapon. If he pulled a gun now, it would be a massacre, and the peace would be shattered irrevocably. He had to play this differently. The first guard struck him in the stomach with the butt of a shotgun. Dominic doubled over, wheezing, but stayed on his feet. The second guard kicked him in the ribs, the same ribs that were already bruised. Pain exploded in his side, white-hot and blinding. Dominic fell to one knee, coughing. Luca walked over and kicked him in the chest, knocking him onto his back in the dirt. He stood over Dominic, his face twisted into a sneer. You think you are a hero? Luca hissed. You are a fool. Love. There is no love in this life, Dominic. There is only leverage, and I have all of it. If you don't sign, I will find her, and when I do, I will make you watch while I hand her over to Henri. Dominic wiped blood from his lip. He looked up at the sky, gray and indifferent. He could pull the gun from his ankle holster. He could kill Luca right now. But if he killed Luca, Eva would be the daughter of a martyr. The families would rally around the Santarellis. Eva would never be free. She would be the cause of a civil war. Dominic slowly pushed himself up. He swayed, spitting blood onto the dry earth. You don't have leverage, Dominic rasped. You have desperation. Henri Valois pulled out of the deal an hour ago. The news of the investigation scared him off. Luca froze. You lie. Check your phone, Dominic challenged. Luca snatched his phone from his pocket. He stared at the screen, his color draining away until he looked like a corpse. The notification was there. The deal was dead. Dominic straightened his jacket, though his ribs screamed in protest. It is over. Luca, Dominic said. You have nothing to sell, and you have no daughter. Luca looked at Dominic, shaking with impotent fury. He raised his hand as if to strike him again, but stopped. He knew he had lost the battle, but the war was far from over. Watch your back, Moretti, Luca whispered. This isn't finished. Dominic turned and walked away. He didn't run. He forced himself to walk steady and slow, even as every breath felt like a knife in his chest. It was dark when the headlights swept across the front of the cabin. Eva had been pacing by the window for hours. When she saw the car, she threw the door open and ran out into the snow, not caring about the cold, Dominic stepped out of the car. He moved stiffly. His lip was split, swollen and purple. There was a cut above his eyebrow, and he held his left arm close to his body. "Dominic!" Eva cried, reaching him just as his knees threatened to buckle. She wrapped her arms around him, taking his weight. "Oh my God, what did he do?" "It's okay," Dominic grunted, leaning on her heavily. "I'm okay." They made it inside, Eva kicking the door shut behind them. She guided him to the sofa near the fire, helping him sit. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of water and a towel, and returned to kneel between his legs. Her hands shook as she dabbed at the cut on his brow. "Why didn't you fight back?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "You are the best fighter I know. Why did you let him do this?" "Because I needed him to know." Dominic winced as she touched his lip. "I needed him to know that he couldn't break me, and I needed the deal with Valois to die. Is it dead?" "Yes." Eva dropped the towel and buried her face in his neck, sobbing. "I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I brought this on you." Dominic's good hand came up to stroke her hair. "You brought me nothing but the truth. Eva," she pulled back, looking at his battered face. "He won't stop. Dominic, you know he won't stop. He will come for us. He will burn everything to the ground to get what he wants." "What will you do?" she asked, her voice small. Dominic looked at her. His eye was swelling shut. His body was broken, but his spirit was terrifyingly whole. He took her hand, his grip iron hard. "Let him come," Dominic said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will burn everything before I lose you." The annual Unity Gala was held in the ballroom of the Grand Hotel, a sprawling venue dripping with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes. For 20 years, this event had served as the polite face of the underworld, a night where the 5 families pretended to be nothing more than philanthropic businessmen concerned with the welfare of the city. Tonight, however, the air in the room was not filled with charity. It was thick with the scent of blood in the water. Dominic Moretti stood at the entrance, adjusting his cufflinks. He wore a tuxedo of midnight black, tailored to perfection, though beneath the fine wool, his ribs were wrapped in tight bandages. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. The beating he had taken from Luca's men yesterday had left him bruised and aching, but he stood with the posture of a king. He could not show weakness, not tonight. Beside him, Eva Santarelli was a vision of defiance. She wore a gown of stark, blinding white silk that flowed around her like water. It was a deliberate choice. In a room full of black and gray, she was a beacon. She wore the Moretti diamonds at her throat, but her chin was held high with a strength that belonged entirely to herself. "Are you ready?" Dominic asked, his voice low. He offered her his arm. Eva looked at his battered face, the bruising around his eye expertly concealed with makeup but still visible to her. She placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I am terrified," she whispered, "but I am ready." "Good," Dominic said. He glanced at the perimeter of the room where a phalanx of reporters stood behind velvet ropes. Dominic had leaked the guest list to the press earlier that afternoon. Usually, the gala was a closed-door event. Tonight, the flashbulbs were waiting. "Remember, the cameras are your shield. Luca cannot touch you while the city is watching." They stepped into the ballroom. The conversation died instantly. 300 heads turned. The silence rippled outward from the doors like a shockwave, the sight of them together. Dominic, the battered warlord, and Eva, the runaway bride, was not what the room had expected. The rumors of their separation, of the abuse, of the French deal, had been swirling for 48 hours. They walked through the crowd, the sea of guests parting before them. Dominic moved slowly, his gait steady despite the agony in his side. Eva walked in lockstep with him, her face a mask of serene confidence. At the center of the room, near the stage where the orchestra played a nervous waltz, stood the elders. The heads of the other 3 families were there, watching with calculating eyes, and in the middle of them stood Luca Santarelli. Luca looked like a man who had not slept in days. His eyes were manic, darting between the elders and the approaching couple. He held a manila folder in his hand. He had clearly planned to announce the divorce himself. to spin the narrative before Dominic could speak, but seeing them walk in together, united, threw him off balance. Dominic stopped 10 feet from him. The music faltered and stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. "Luca," Dominic said, "Hane," his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You look unwell." "You have some nerve showing your face here," Don Luca hissed. Stepping forward, he was playing to the audience, to the elders. "After the lies you have spread? After you kidnapped my daughter?" "I'm standing right here." "Papa," Eva said. Her voice was clear, bell-like in the quiet hall. "I was not kidnapped. I was saved." A gasp ran through the crowd. The reporters at the back surged against the ropes, cameras flashing rapidly, capturing the confrontation. Luca's face turned a mottled shade of purple. He realized he was losing control of the room. He had to act. He thrust the manila folder toward Dominic. "This charade ends now," Luca announced, raising his voice so the elders could hear. "My daughter has filed for divorce. She has realized her mistake. This union is dissolved. Sign the papers. Moretti. Give me back my daughter, and perhaps the council will let you keep your life." It was a power move. Public humiliation. He was betting that Dominic would not dare defy the council in open court. Dominic looked at the folder. He didn't take it. Eva stepped forward. She moved out of Dominic's shadow and stood toe-to-toe with her father. She looked at the man who had sold her, the man who had terrorized her for 20 years, and she saw him for what he was, small. "Sign them if you dare," she whispered. The challenge hung in the air, sharp as a razor. Luca blinked, taken aback. "What? You want a divorce?" Eva said, her voice rising, strong and undeniable. "Then you sign them. Papa, you sign the paper that admits you failed. You sign the paper that admits you sold your own flesh and blood for a trade deal that fell apart. Go ahead. Show them who you really are." Luca's hand trembled. He looked at the reporters, then at the stone-faced elders. He couldn't sign. If he signed now, he was admitting defeat. He was admitting that his daughter had beaten the great Luca Santarelli. Dominic stepped forward then. He reached out and took the folder from Luca's paralyzed hand. "He can't sign them, Eva," Dominic said smoothly, "because he knows they are worthless." Dominic reached into his pocket and produced a silver Zippo lighter. He flicked the lid open with a metallic clink that echoed in the silence. "What are you doing?" one of the elders shouted. Dominic held the flame to the corner of the legal documents. The paper caught instantly. The yellow fire licked up the side of the pages, curling the edges, turning the ink to ash. "There is no divorce," Dominic said, holding the burning papers up for the room to see. His voice was not a shout, but a command. Because there was no marriage. He dropped the burning folder onto the polished marble floor between him and Luca. The flames danced, casting a flickering light on their faces. "There was only a war," Dominic declared, looking at the elders, then at Luca. "A war disguised as a wedding, a war for territory, for power, for leverage, and I'm ending it tonight." "You cannot do this," Luca screamed, lunging forward. "This is blasphemy. The council decided—" "The council is obsolete if it sanctions the sale of women like cattle," Dominic roared back, his composure finally cracking to reveal the fury beneath. "I am done with your deals. I am done with your alliances. The Moretti family walks away. Tonight." Chaos erupted. The room exploded into noise. The elders were shouting orders, guards were pushing through the crowd, and the reporters were screaming questions, their flashes turning the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Get them out!" someone yelled. "Traitor!" another voice screamed. Bruno, Dominic's consigliere, appeared at Dominic's elbow, his face pale. "Dom, we have to move. Now, the security is compromised." Dominic grabbed Eva's hand. "Go, don't let go of me." They turned and ran. The exit was only 50 feet away, but the crowd had turned into a mob. People were shoving, shouting. Security guards in black suits were converging on them, weapons drawn but hesitant to fire with so many witnesses. They burst through the double doors into the cool night air. The valet stand was in chaos. Bruno shoved a valet aside and jumped into the driver's seat of Dominic's armored sedan. Dominic threw the back door open and pushed Eva inside. He turned to follow her, but as he twisted, his body finally rebelled. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the confrontation vanished. The pain in his ribs exploded, a white-hot supernova in his chest. His vision grayed out. His legs, solid as oak moments ago, turned to water. He collapsed onto the asphalt, his knees hitting the ground hard. "Dominic!" Eva screamed. She scrambled across the leather seat, reaching out for him. "Dominic, get up! Please, get up!" Bruno was revving the engine. "Boss, we have company!" 2 black SUVs were screeching around the corner, tires smoking. Luca's men. Dominic gritted his teeth, a guttural sound of effort tearing from his throat. He grabbed the door frame, his knuckles white. With a sheer act of will, he hauled himself up and fell into the back seat. Eva grabbed him, pulling him fully inside, just as Bruno slammed on the gas. The car surged forward, tires squealing, leaving the chaos of the gala behind in a cloud of exhaust. "Are you hit?" Eva cried, her hands frantically searching his body for bullet holes. "Dominic, look at me!" Dominic lay back against the seat, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He closed his eyes, sweat beading on his forehead. "No, not hit, just the ribs." Something shifted. Eva cradled his head in her lap. She smoothed the hair back from his damp forehead, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He looked gray. The invincible Dominic Moretti looked mortal. "Drive, Bruno!" she yelled at the partition. "Get us out of here!" "I'm going, Eva, I'm going!" Bruno shouted back, swerving through traffic, running a red light. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, the city lights fading behind them as they climbed toward the highway that led back to the mountains. The cabin was the only safe place left. The estate would be swarming with Luca's men. The apartment was a death trap. Dominic's breathing slowly evened out, though he didn't open his eyes. His hand found Eva's in the dark, gripping it tightly. "You were incredible," he rasped, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Sign them if you dare." "My God." "Eva, don't talk," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "Save your strength. We just have to get to the cabin." "We did it," he murmured. "We burned it down." "Yes," she said softly, "we did." But the victory was short-lived. Dominic's phone, which had been silent in his pocket, began to vibrate. It wasn't a call. It was a specific pattern. 3 long buzzes, 2 short. Dominic's eyes snapped open. The haze of pain vanished, replaced by instant alertness. He sat up, groaning, and pulled the phone out. "Who is it?" Eva asked, sensing the change in the atmosphere. "It's Leo," Dominic said. "My cousin, he runs the enforcement arm for the North." He answered the phone. "Leo." The voice on the other end was breathless, distorted by wind and the sound of an engine. "Dom, listen to me carefully," Leo said. "Don't go to the estate. Don't go to the safe house in the city. We are heading to the mountains," Dominic said. "They know." Leo cut him off. "Dom, the council just voted 5 minutes ago. Luca called for a blood vote. He told them you broke the sacred truce by burning the contract publicly. He told them you are dismantling the organization." Dominic's grip on the phone tightened. And they listened," Leo said, his voice cracking. "It is a red notice. Dominic, a sanction. They have ordered a hit on both of you, not just Luca's men. Everyone, the Morettis, the Santarellis, the Russians, everyone has a green light." Eva heard the words through the silence of the car. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Who stood against it?" Dominic asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Me, Bruno, a few others, but we are outnumbered. Dom, they are sending cleaners to the mountain road. You have maybe an hour before they cut off the pass." "Okay," Dominic said. "Thank you." "Leo." "Run, cousin," Leo whispered. "Just run." Dominic lowered the phone. He looked at Eva. The triumph of the gala was gone, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. They weren't just outcasts anymore. They were prey. "Bruno," Dominic said, leaning forward, his voice sharp and commanding despite his injuries. "Yeah, boss. Get off the highway, take the logging roads. They issued a red notice." The car swerved slightly as Bruno's hands jerked on the wheel. "A red notice? On you? But you're the Don." Not anymore, Dominic said, looking back at Eva. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. Now, I am just a man with a target on his back. Eva took his hand and kissed his knuckles, her fear hardening into resolve. We are in this together, she said. You promised you would burn everything before you lost me. I did, Dominic said, looking out into the dark wilderness rushing past them. And the fire is just getting started. The cabin was silent, save for the metallic click-clack of Dominic loading a magazine into a handgun. The fire had burned down to ash, much like the life they had known 24 hours ago. We cannot run forever, Dominic said, his voice rough. He winced as he slid the weapon into his holster, his bruised ribs protesting the movement. They will cut off the passes by dawn. The airports are watched. The ports are closed to us. Eva stood by the heavy wooden table, staring at the map of the city spread out before them. She looked different. The terrified girl who had wept in her bathtub was gone. In her place stood a woman who had walked into a gala in a white dress and set a contract on fire. She wore jeans and a heavy coat now, her hair tied back, her eyes clear and hard. Then we do not run, Eva said. We go back. Dominic looked up, his eyes narrowing. To the estate? It is a fortress, Eva. And right now, the garrison inside has orders to kill us on sight. They have orders to kill you, Eva corrected, because Luca told the council you are a rogue. He told them you are destroying the family for a personal vendetta. We have to show them the truth. We have to show them that Luca is the one rotting the foundation. Dominic shook his head. We need leverage, and we need an army to get through the front gate. You have an army, she said softly. Dominic paused. He looked at the burner phone on the table. He thought of the debts he had collected over a decade of ruling the underworld. There was one marker he had never called in. He picked up the phone and dialed a number that hadn't been active in 5 years. It rang 4 times. Moretti, a gravelly voice answered. It was Sean O'Malley, the head of the Irish syndicate that controlled the docks, a man Dominic had spared during the port wars 3 years ago. I'm cashing it in. Sean, Dominic said, skipping the pleasantries. The life I gave you. I need it back. I heard you are a walking dead man. Dom, O'Malley said, the word is out. Red notice. I need a convoy, Dominic said. I need safe passage to the Moretti estate. And I need you to make sure the guards at the gate hesitate long enough for me to get inside. There was a long silence on the line. Then, a low chuckle. You Italians and your drama. I will be there in an hour. With the boys. Dominic hung up. He looked at Eva. We are going to war. Eva reached into her bag and pulled out the hard drive containing every recording, every email, every piece of evidence she had gathered against her father. She held it up like a weapon. No, she said, her voice steady. We are going to court. The approach to the Moretti estate was usually a quiet drive through manicured forests. Today, there was a siege. 3 black SUVs, led by O'Malley's armored truck, tore up the driveway. At the main gate, the Moretti guards raised their rifles, but they didn't fire. Confusion rippled through their ranks. They saw the Irish flags on the lead truck, and they saw Dominic Moretti sitting in the passenger seat of the second vehicle, his face battered but his gaze lethal. Open the gate, Dominic roared through the open window. Or explain to the council why you fired on the Don while he was under the protection of a rival family. The captain of the guard hesitated. The red notice was absolute, but the politics were messy. If they killed O'Malley's men, they would start a war with the Irish. If they killed Dominic while he was technically parleying, they violated the code of conduct. The gate groaned open. The convoy sped through, screeching to a halt at the foot of the grand staircase. Dominic kicked the door open and stepped out. He was in agony, his body screaming with every movement, but he forced himself to stand tall. He wore his torn tuxedo shirt and a leather jacket, looking less like a businessman and more like the street fighter he had been born as. Eva stepped out beside him. She held the hard drive tight in her hand. Stay close to me, Dominic murmured. They walked up the stairs. The heavy oak doors were barred, but O'Malley's men blew the lock with a breaching shotgun. The sound echoed like a cannon blast. Dominic and Eva stepped into the grand hall. It was full. The council had convened an emergency session to ratify the change in leadership. The elders sat at the long table at the far end of the room. Luca Santarelli stood near the head of the table, a glass of champagne in his hand, looking like he had already won. When Dominic entered, the room froze. 50 armed men leveled their weapons at him. O'Malley's men leveled theirs back. The air was thick enough to choke on. "Put down your guns," Dominic shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I am still the head of this table until the breath leaves my body." "You are a traitor," Luca screamed, his face twisting with hate. "Kill him! The order has been given." "Wait!" The voice was not Dominic's, it was Eva's. She stepped out from behind Dominic. She walked into the center of the room, directly into the line of fire. The red laser sights of a dozen rifles danced on her chest, but she didn't flinch. "You want to kill him?" Eva asked, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with every word. "You want to kill the only man who has ever put the family's honor above his own profit?" "Eva, get back," Luca growled. "This is men's business." "This is my business," Eva snapped. She turned to the elders, 5 old men who had watched the family's rise and fall for 50 years. "My father told you that Dominic broke the truce. He told you that Dominic is reckless." She walked to the table and slammed the hard drive down onto the polished wood. "This drive contains records of Luca Santarelli's private accounts," she announced. "It proves that for 3 years. He has been skimming from the joint construction funds. It proves he was selling territory to the Russians behind your backs. And it proves that he arranged my marriage to the French syndicate not to strengthen this alliance, but to buy himself a retirement villa in Nice before the rest of you realized the accounts were empty." A murmur ran through the room. Luca went pale. "She is lying!" Luca shouted, lunging for the drive. "She is hysterical!" Dominic moved, fast, despite his injuries. He intercepted Luca, shoving him back hard. Luca stumbled and fell into a chair. Dominic stood over him, then turned his back on him to face the elders. "You know me," Dominic said to the old man. "I have never stolen a dime from you. I have never lied to you. I burned that contract last night because it was sold on a lie. Luca was not building an alliance. He was selling us out." One of the elders, a man named Don Carlo, reached out and took the hard drive. He looked at Luca, then at Dominic. "If this is true," Carlo said, his voice like dry leaves, "then the red notice is void." "It is true," Eva said. "Check the timestamps. Listen to the recordings. He calls you dinosaurs on tape. He laughs about how easy it was to fool you." The room was silent. The guards slowly lowered their weapons. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Don Carlo looked at Luca. The contempt in his eyes was a death sentence. "You have disgraced us, Santarelli." Then he looked at Dominic. "If we lift the sanction, will you take your seat, Dominic? Will you restore order?" Dominic looked at the high-backed chair at the head of the table. It was the seat of power. It was the throne he had killed for, bled for, and sacrificed his soul for. He looked at Eva. She was watching him, her eyes wide, waiting. She wouldn't ask him to leave. She respected him too much. She was waiting for him to choose. Dominic looked back at the elder. "No," Dominic said. Gasps filled the room again. "I am done," Dominic said, his voice clear and resolute. "I have given this family 20 years of blood. I have protected your interests. I have fought your wars, but I will not sacrifice her. And I cannot keep her safe if I sit in that chair." "You cannot just walk away," Don Carlo warned. "No one walks away." "I am walking away," Dominic said. "I am dissolving the alliance. The Santarelli territory is yours to divide. Take it as reparation for Luca's theft. In exchange, you give us a clean slate. No hits, no tails. We disappear." The elders exchanged glances. It was a profitable deal. They would gain massive territory without firing a shot. And they would be rid of a volatile leader who had suddenly grown a conscience. "And the condition?" Don Carlo asked. "There is always a condition. You never return," the elder said. "If you set foot in this city again, if we hear a whisper of the name Moretti, the truce is over." Dominic nodded once. "Agreed," He turned to Eva. He held out his hand. She took it, her fingers lacing with his, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. "Wait," Dominic said. He walked over to the grand fireplace where a fire was crackling. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was their marriage certificate, the state license they had signed 6 months ago. "Dominic?" Eva whispered. "This was signed under their laws." Dominic said softly, "Under their shadow." He tossed the paper into the fire. It curled and blackened, the names Santarelli and Moretti vanishing into smoke. "Now," Dominic said, turning to her, "we are free." They walked out of the grand hall, past the confused guards, past the defeated Luca who sat with his head in his hands, and out into the sunlight. They didn't look back. 1 month later. The air smelled of salt and gasoline. It had a good smell, a clean smell. Dominic wiped his hands on a rag, sliding out from under the chassis of a 1967 Mustang. He wore blue coveralls stained with oil, and a smudge of grease streaked across his cheek. His ribs had healed, though the ache flared up when it rained. He didn't mind. It was a reminder that he was alive. The garage was small, a 2-bay shop on the edge of a sleepy coastal town 300 miles from the city. No one here knew who he was. To them, he was just Dom, the quiet mechanic who could fix anything with an engine. He tossed the rag onto the workbench and walked out into the sunlight. Eva was sitting on a bench near the dunes, a notebook on her lap. She was writing furiously, the pen scratching across the paper. She was working on an article about the invisible women of organized crime syndicates. She wrote under the name Elena Rossi, and her first piece had already been picked up by a major magazine. She looked up as he approached, shielding her eyes from the sun. She looked younger here. The tension that had defined her face for so long had smoothed out. She smiled, a genuine, easy expression that hit Dominic in the chest every time he saw it. "Is the Mustang finished?" she asked. "It purrs like a kitten," Dominic said. "How is the revolution going?" "Slowly," she laughed, closing her notebook. "But the words are coming. Come walk with me," he said. They walked down to the water's edge, kicking off their shoes to let the cold Atlantic surf wash over their feet. The beach was empty, save for a few seagulls fighting over a crab. Dominic stopped and turned to her. He took her hands in his. They were rougher now, calloused from the work, but he held her with a gentleness that he had learned in the quiet of the cabin. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Eva's breath hitched. "Dominic!" He opened it. Inside was a ring. It was not a diamond. It was a simple band of gold, hammered and imperfect, set with a small, sea-glass blue stone that matched the color of the water. "I bought this with the money from the first car I fixed," Dominic said. "No family money, no blood money, just mine." He took her left hand. The finger was bare. She had left the heavy Moretti diamond on the dresser back at the estate. "This isn't a contract," Dominic said, looking into her eyes. "It isn't an alliance. It doesn't come with an army or a territory." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is just a promise," he whispered, "that I will be here, every day, as long as you want me." Eva looked at the ring, shining in the sun. It was modest. It was humble. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She looked up at Dominic, the mechanic, the survivor, the man who had burned down his kingdom to keep her safe. She smiled, and tears of happiness pricked her eyes. She reached up, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him down to her. "This time," she whispered against his lips, "I choose you." He kissed her, and the sound of the ocean drowned out the rest of the world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been an incredible journey walking with Dominic and Eva from the cold silence of their arranged marriage to the warm freedom of the coast. I hope you enjoyed this tale of redemption, courage, and a love that was worth burning everything down for. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from today? Did you think Dominic made the right choice leaving the family? Please don't forget to subscribe to Mafia romance stories for more passionate, emotional, and thrilling tales. Share your thoughts in English below. I read every single one. Until next time.